Welcome to the Center of Light Radio with spiritual teacher, intuitive, musician, composer, and best-selling author of The Divine Principle, Anchoring Heaven on Earth, your host, Keith Anthony Blanchard.
Coast to coast, pole to pole, all around the world on the internet, thanks to the marvel of technology, I am coming at you live from my little guest house in Memphis, Tennessee. This is Keith Anthony Blanchard, and you are listening to Center of Light Radio, Center of Divine Unfoldment and Reinforcement, the superhighway to knowledge for that which is most important. And that would be you. You are important to me. You can bet on that as to why I am your host sitting in this chair every Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to empower you with the tools you need to beat your feet towards your best life. Beat your feet towards your bliss. Strap in all ye bro-ham and sis-star astronauts as we launch for inner space. I have a phenomenal guest on my show tonight. I'm going to get to that shortly. I'm excited. You should be as well. My RPM program, Recognize, Plug In, and Manifest. You can now learn more about this life-changing program, and this is my lifelong work. You can find that at centeroflightradio.com. Go to the right-hand bottom side of the opening page. You'll see a subscription form. Fill that out. I promise you I will not send you junk. You'll get a newsletter from me once a month filled with lots of really cool things. I put a lot of time and effort into finding these spiritual, empowering, juicy morsels that expand my heart, expands my life, expands my mind. And I will offer that to you in turn. Why? Because I do care about your life and what makes you happy. And expansion is what it's all about for me. Hope it is for you as well. While you sign your name to that subscription form, you will also have information about my RPM program. You can also go to send me an email at keithanthonyblanchard@gmail.com. I would be glad to respond to you about the RPM program that way, but also to respond to you whatever it is you may be asking for as to why you'd be in touch with me in the first place. Also, while you're at Center of Light Radio, just next to that subscription form, you're going to see a movie banner. And the meek shall inherit the earth. The Prophecy Realized. Documentary, informative, transformational film I made just under a year ago. It's to help people see what may be happening in the outside world with a different set of glasses. Without judgment, without fear, without thinking that what's going on in the world is terrorism or chaos. Well, I understand that there's terrorism and chaos. But when you take this out of the equation of your perception, things change. Somehow, strangely, you will see order in what is taking place as we look out and about in the world of these things that can sometimes be very troubling. Make sure you check that out. To call into Center of Light Radio, dial 888-919-2355. 888-919-2355. Remember, if you're not at home by your computer and you want to hear your favorite show, hopefully it's Center of Light Radio, you can go to the App Store on your phone and download the Inception Radio Network app for free. Everything will be right there in the palm of your hand. Chat room, listen live link, news, podcasts, much, much more. There are many ways to connect to Center of Light Radio. That's for sure. And now it's time to get down to Center of Light Radio business. Today on Center of Light Radio, my guest is Father Francis Tiso, and we will be speaking about the rainbow body and the resurrection. Father Francis was Associate Director of the Secretariat for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops from 2004 to 2009, where he served as liaison to Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, the Sikhs, and the traditional religions, as well as the Reformed confessions. Before coming to the USCCB, Father Tiso was assigned to the Archdiocese of San Francisco, where he served as a Parochial Vicar of St. Thomas More Church and Chaplain at San Francisco State University and the University of California Medical School. He was also visiting professor in the Archdiocesan School of Pastoral Leadership, where he taught courses in Foundational Theology. He also served as Parochial Vicar in Eureka, California, and in Mill Valley, California. In 1995, Father Tiso was invited to accompany Cardinal Francis Arinze, then head of Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, to a dialogue with Buddhist leaders in Taiwan. He has traveled extensively in India, Nepal, Tibet, Thailand, Japan, and Bangladesh. Father Tiso has written and lectured widely. He is the recipient of grants from the American Academy of Religion, the American Philosophical Society, the Palmer's Fund in Switzerland, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Petaluma, California. He is a musician and paints in acrylics and watercolors. Welcome to Center of Light Radio, Father Francis Tiso. I've been doing some research on some of your videos, and one thing that stuck out very, very prominent for me was in this YouTube video you said what these people are doing in these caves is that in meditation they're going inside and they're healing every aspect of their life when someone may have fought to them, but they're going inside and they're mending all these wounds. Would that be correct?
That's a very important part of the process. That is correct.
Tell me about your book, Rainbow Body and the Resurrection, and how those two come together from a Christian standpoint of view. I don't think they would actually allow or invite such a new idea into the movement, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, the book starts off with a very simple proposal on the part of my own spiritual father, Brother David Steindl-Rast, who's a Benedictine monk. He said, years ago that he felt the Jesus Seminar was off on the wrong track when it came to the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus, that they had been using methods that he felt led them away from affirming that the resurrection was a historical reality. And so he felt that we needed some other kind of information to try to turn the argument around. So he explored, for example, the Holy Shroud of Turin, which is the relic that purports to be the burial cloth of Jesus. It's very controversial, but also one of the most studied relics in the history of Western culture. And but then he said, I have a friend in Switzerland who has just gotten word, this was back in 1999, just gotten word that a Buddhist monk in eastern Tibet has passed away, and within a few days of his death, the body disappeared with mysterious signs, light and so forth. So he said, why don't you go and talk to my friend, find out exactly how to get to the place where this happened, and go over there with your Tibetan skills and your knowledge of the culture and try to interview the eyewitnesses and see if we've got any clues there about the resurrection, either of Jesus or the resurrection of everybody that's supposed to take place at the end of time, which in this case seems to have happened before the end of time. And so this pretty wild line of inquiry led me to Switzerland. I met with the friend who is a Zen teacher, and he brought me to a Tibetan doctor who comes from the village where all this happened. And I was able to get the information I needed, and I organized a quick trip to Tibet that year, and then the following year a longer expedition to interview eyewitnesses of these paranormal events. And then I followed that up with further interviews in 2001 and 2003, widening the field of attention. I also visited Eastern Europe to talk about incorruption and relics with the Romanian Orthodox monks. And so over a number of years, I put together a large body of material and interviews. At that point, I paused because I realized the great difficulty in presenting these interviews as scientific evidence. You understand what I'm saying? And so I said to myself, this is going to be awfully hard to present as scientific evidence, and I need to think about this. So I thought about it for a long time, almost 10 years. And then finally, I came up with several conclusions, insights, and so forth that allowed me to put together the book, which brings together the research I did in Tibet and elsewhere on dissolving the body after death, the practices that are supposed to lead to that experience or manifestation, and also some hints about possible cross-cultural contacts between Christians in Central Asia and Buddhists in Central Asia and China that may have contributed to Buddhists wanting to do this. All right, because remember, Buddhism normally doesn't focus much on the body, and at best it's the body in meditation. But the idea that at death your body is going to dissolve isn't really a classic Buddhist theme. So how all of a sudden, why all of a sudden, did this come into a certain kind of Tibetan Buddhism? Not all kinds. And not all of the schools in Tibet even accept the idea that the body dissolves. But something was going on, and I think, to put it in very few words, to make it simple for our listeners, I think it was the encounter with the Christians and their faith in the resurrection of Jesus that stimulated the Buddhists to think about something they hadn't thought about. And that is, what happens at death to a human body, and how can it manifest spiritual attainment? And I think that's where the book gets interesting. And that's where the exploration gets kind of dense and methodologically challenging.
Is this pertaining to all human death, or for those who are spiritually endowed, working their way into mastery?
Okay. The folks who actually have these attainments, almost 99.9%, people who are recognized for one reason or another as serious practitioners, that doesn't mean they're famous. In several cases that have been reported, even for the 20th century, they were very humble people, people who were not noted as scholars or even monks, lay people who practiced quietly without attracting attention to themselves. So that tradition of the humble village practitioner who does his meditation or her meditation in a quiet sort of way, goes into retreat from time to time, doesn't have disciples, doesn't try to attract attention. This also is part of the story. But there are, of course, others, and including the monk Khenpo Ache, who was a well-known scholar and monk and teacher and guide to many people. And the fact that he, at death, manifested the dissolution caused something of a stir, even in his village and in the region surrounding it in eastern Tibet.
I've recently seen some video footage of some guy from Tibet. The video footage came by the way of James Gilliland, and this particular Tibetan gentleman that he is friends with. The footage was of him actually moving about in his rainbow body. And the light phenomena that came off this gentleman was truly beautiful and phenomenal. Have you had the opportunity to see someone moving about and performing through their rainbow body throughout your work?
Okay, that's an interesting account. Anne Klein, who is a scholar, I think, at Rice University in Texas, has some photos in one of her books of a master whose body seems to be dissolving while he teaches. And those photos are extremely interesting as well. When I went to interview the Lama, his name was the Lama Achung, who was the close friend of Khenpo Ache, this other Lama showed us two photographs of himself. And they were taken in the dark, and he was manifesting in one a kind of aura or halo around his body of light. And in the other photo, it seemed as if his body had gone into three distinct bodies, kind of superimposed on one another. And those also radiated light. But I personally have never seen, I'm going to be careful about this, as far as I know, I've never seen a living person who manifested this in front of me specifically. And now let's be careful about our terminology. The rainbow body is a specific phenomenon, all right? It has its different characteristics, there are different classifications, but it always refers to something that goes on at the time of death, okay? This is the final culmination of a person's life, all right? To manifest this dissolution and the phenomena of light at the time of death. That doesn't mean that during the life of some of these practitioners, these masters, that there will also, that there will not be manifestations of light and other paranormal phenomena during their life. But I would say that that's different from the rainbow body. That would be a manifestation, maybe what we could call, of the body of light, which is one of the attainments of somebody practicing Buddhist Tantra. Okay? Now, take, for example, I'll give you an example of a personal experience of the body of light of a master that I did, in fact, see, but which I would not call a rainbow body. All right, may I do that? I was at a gathering to which I had been invited in Nova Scotia back in 1995, and I met a number of the leading Tibetan lamas from a number of traditions, and one of them was Chagdud Tulku, who is a Nyingma Lama, whose home monastery is, in fact, not far from the places that I explored in the year 2000. And all the other masters greeted me in various ways, everything from, folded hands to a bear hug. But he didn't say or do anything except make a very simple half bow with his upper part of his body. In the moment that he bowed to greet me, I saw his subtle body. In other words, I saw the channels and chakras as light inside his body, all right, for a moment. And then that stopped. And I bowed to him, and that was that. So something happened there. There was a click. There was an opening, and I'm sure that he did it intentionally as a way of saying, this is cool, this is a good thing. And we should stay in touch. And in fact, I did make retreats in his retreat center with his disciples in later years. But it was very lovely to have that experience. So that I could say that, yes, I have seen the body of light attainment of a master of Buddhist Tantra. But I cannot say that I personally have seen someone's rainbow body at the time of death or after the time of death. Okay?
Father Francis, with your knowledge of different religions and cultures, are you familiar with the Merkaba or the Merkaba from the Jewish tradition?
Yes.
Would that play a role in the light, subtle body that you saw? As far as, to my knowledge, it's been so many years since I studied in that field, but that the Merkaba is a vehicle that one becomes aware of through spiritual practice. And because of this vehicle and their awareness of it, they can actually manipulate, to use the word, themselves, change their reality, move through doorways, or whatever the situation may be. Would this at all be the same as the light body that you described here shortly with the monk that bowed to you?
Okay. Merkaba, a really, really interesting tradition that's always been very difficult to pinpoint at its origin, because there are some hints in the Hebrew scriptures to this kind of thing. The prophets ascend before the throne of God, and there, the powerful beings of the universe are in God's court, and God announces to the prophet, in that visionary experience of the ascent before the throne of God, God announces what the prophet must say when he gets back to the earthly reality, right? All the things that have to be told to the people of Israel. So that's some of the origins in the prophetic tradition, and then later in the apocalyptic tradition of the ascent to the throne. And then we have St. Paul in 2 Corinthians 12 talking about being, outside the body or maybe inside the body. He knows not, and ascends into the third heaven to hear revelations that cannot be spoken. So evidently, St. Paul knew something about this practice as well. But it's been quite a topic of controversy as to whether the full-fledged Merkaba mysticism existed at that time. I think there are some fragments from Qumran, the Essene literature, that hint that they might have known something about this too. Now, we don't have anything from Buddhism in the 1st century AD that corresponds to this, all right, to the Merkaba mysticism. And we don't have anything that corresponds to specific practices that would say you do this and then you will be taken to a higher plane and then you will have visionary experiences. There are descriptions in the Buddhist canon of the Buddha ascending and talking to the gods, even arguing with the gods. But those texts are thought to be later than the 1st century AD. For a long time, we scholars of Buddhism have been led to believe that the Pali Canon is the oldest extant Buddhist scripture collection. But more and more, as we gather information from archaeology and language study and so forth, we're beginning to realize that the Pali Canon is really something from maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, even later, in the modern era, in the Common Era or Christian era AD. So it's awfully hard to say that at the same time that Jewish mystics were experiencing something like this ascent to the throne of God with various mystical phenomena, to say that that is the same thing that the Buddhists were doing and knew about. It's one of those problems where you don't have the texts to prove the point. The texts that you have are from a later period. So you can't demonstrate that in the same period of time, the same practices gave rise to similar experiences. However, it is interesting that we do have, let's say 3rd century, 4th century accounts of the Buddha who does go, into a higher sphere and is able to converse with higher powers on various levels. So they knew something at some point. Who came first is almost impossible to determine. But a lot of recent scholarship is starting to show us that we have better evidence for the Middle East than we do for India, and that really surprises me. I always thought that the Indian material was much older and could be shown to be much older. But in reality, the historical record, the track that we can trace, gives priority to the Middle East for some strange reason. And this is kind of hard for me even to digest today, and I'm sure for many of my colleagues, not easy to digest. Christopher Beckwith, who is one of the great scholars of Central Asia, whom I quote a great deal in my book, has written a book called Greek Buddha, in which he talks about the philosopher Pyrrho, who in the 3rd century BC did encounter Buddhism in India and then came back to Greece and taught a kind of skeptical line of inquiry that leads to inner peace and tranquility. And the more he pieces together the ideas of Pyrrho, the more he realizes that Pyrrho must have known some of the earliest teachings of Buddha. And that means that the 3rd century BC is the time period in which we can talk about a kind of Buddhist philosophy that really existed, which wasn't particularly mystical. It was really, like people say, a philosophy rather than a religion, a philosophy of life, a way of looking at phenomena, and of detaching yourself from mistaken concepts and opinions, bringing you gradually through meditation to inner peace, ataraxia in Greek, which would in some ways correspond to shamatha and vipassana, the very thing you mentioned at the start of our interview, that is the healing of the inner fractures and wounds that is necessary to attain perfect peace with oneself and with the world around one. So that seems to be early Buddhism. That's what early Buddhism was, and not a mystical system at all. So Buddhist Tantra and the visualizations and the deities and the rituals and the mantras come quite a bit later into mainstream Buddhism.
Center of Light Radio, speaking with my guest today, Father Francis Tiso. With your title being Father, are you Catholic? Are you a Catholic priest?
Yes, I'm a Catholic priest.
When I was about 13 years old, I started off as an altar boy. I was raised Catholic as well. And a few years later, I loved being an altar boy. I guess something about my name being in light, so to speak, on the back bulletin board, knowing I was going to serve the next week, as to why I'm a musician now in the light. Metaphorically, my life is driven by light through this radio show and everything that I promote and I'm about. But that being said, when I was about 15 years old, my father sent me off to a pre-seminary school, and I was seriously thinking about becoming a priest. And then little did he realize when he handed me that electric guitar, God went in the closet and the guitar stayed out. And after many, many years of ignoring my path, it was made known to me. I was put on my knees, and then I heard through a divine experience one morning in sleep after a dark night of the soul with a girlfriend of 10 years that we split apart. I began to say this prayer, Father Francis, and this prayer was, I need to hear your voice, I need to hear your voice. And in that supplication, I had so much passion and sincerity. Though I said this prayer for 3 weeks to a month, that wasn't required. All that was required was the oomph I had in my first asking. 3 weeks later, I was awakened in the morning out of my sleep by a voice saying, "Good morning, Keith, it's time to wake up." And in that it's time to wake up, it wasn't necessarily get out of bed and start your day. It was like, a tap on my spiritual noggin. "Keith, it's time to wake up." And I was thrown into a divine experience. I smelled the voice. I tasted the voice. I heard the voice. I felt the voice. It was everything imaginable. It was the chair. It was the bed. It was all the molecules around me. I was having a super conscious experience. And there was no time for fear, obviously. The voice, and keep in mind, the information was not the conversation, was not being imparted to me through fragmented thoughts that follow thoughts. It was one impression, whole thought, I guess you can say. And the voice instructs me to sit on the sofa and let my mouth move and press record on the tape player. And I said, "What will I speak about?" And I said, "Trust me, Keith, the thoughts will come." So for a year, I logged this information. And after about a year in meditation, I heard, "Keith, put all this aside now. Let your thoughts, feelings, and life experiences be the glue that finalizes and puts the book nicely fashioned together." After about 8 years I didn't want to just recite this work, Father. I wanted to live it. I wanted to make sure it was concrete, it was sound, it was solid, because I didn't want to be just another parrot reciting a bunch of rhetoric. All that being said, the book became bestseller. And the reason I'm bringing this up to you is I know what it was like for me to make such a transition from musician with a bunch of beliefs to a place of really hungry to move into other areas, other fields of religion or spirituality. How is it with you? How are your peers viewing you and what you're doing? Do you find that they're more open-minded, or do you find that they're just kind of off-put?
Yeah, this really touches, and that's a great account. I'm not sure. I may have heard of you someplace, but because it sounds very familiar to me from some other account. But in any case, whatever the case may be, what you went through illustrates the exact problem that I'm trying to get at in this book. All right, so our scholars will tell us which came first, on the basis of texts and archaeology. But what was the experience? What was the actual experience of real flesh and blood human beings who were praying, who were offering rituals, who were fasting, who were living in caves, who were obeying their masters for many, many years, and all of the things. What happened to them? What really happened to them as human beings when they underwent these transformative processes? Okay, and it was great in some of these interviews to talk to people who were willing to share not only their eyewitness account of the death of the Khenpo, but in some cases to talk to some people who were yogis and medical practitioners who had had visionary experiences that had changed their lives and had led them into new paths and guided them in specific things that they needed to do the healing work that they were called to do, for example, and many other things as well. So in my own case, all right, as an undergraduate, I can recall a number of experiences that really got to me. I mean, I was kind of primed because I had already been praying and meditating pretty intensely from childhood, practically. I mean, it was sort of normal for me. And I was always interested in science and art and cultures around the world. But I also had this pretty fierce, intense attachment to my Catholicism. I was never really much of an altar boy, and I went to public schools and all that kind of thing. But we were always at mass and confession every 2 weeks, and I was saying the rosary every day from the time I was 11, and reading a lot, reading Bible, reading Lives of the Saints, a lot of stuff like that through adolescence, and soaking up things like Dante's Divine Comedy and sacred music, Baroque and classical music.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
parallel that way. My
right.
appetite for information is very insatiable, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So you get to college, and a lot of my friends were doing LSD, which I never did. And I'm sitting with them as they trip, and trying to help them because, of course, they're pretty much, that was pretty risky stuff back in the late 60s, early 70s. And that got me thinking that in addition to all this knowledge, I needed to be compassionate. I needed to learn to be, a loving person and an accepting person of things that were really not something that would have been acceptable, to my family, right? So I did a lot of that, and then I had experiences like the one you're describing. Like I went to Cornell. So Cornell is famous for 2 limestone gorges on either side of the campus. And I can recall one crisp, cold winter morning hearing a voice that told me, "Come on outside, go down into the gorge. I want to show you something." And so I went out, and everything came alive. The ice and the snow and the water and the rocks, it became totally alive. As in your case, the unpacking of the verbal, conceptual content of that experience took a long time after. But in the moment, you see everything. You see the whole thing, and that was really important for me. But it wasn't the only experience of that kind that I had over those years, and that really did help shape, my choice to become a priest, because I realized, on the one hand, with my friends with the LSD, I needed to be a compassionate, loving person, patient, and willing to go out on a limb for people. So that's the priest wanting to serve. But then I also realized I needed to be a spiritually experienced person, a person with inner life. Couldn't just get up there in a pulpit and preach if you didn't have anything inside. And Brother David Steindl-Rast, one of the monks of that community, became my principal spiritual guide. He's still alive. He's over 90 years old and continues to inspire people. An amazing person. And so off I went. It is interesting also in that period of time that I had an experience of seeing all of the cosmic and biological evolution as a visionary experience. And years later, I spoke to a close friend of mine who's in the priesthood, and I said to him, I won't give his name, but because he is kind of well known, but he gave up a very big business to become a priest. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And we were on retreat together, and it was a good time to share. And he told me the story of this visionary experience of the evolution of the universe and his place in that as being the priest of creation. And it was identical to my own, even though it took place, I would guess, about 16 years after I had mine. So that's pretty wild, when you can compare notes with somebody and they've had the same mystical experience, So, that doesn't happen too often in life. But there are these openings that occur. And even your story about the tape, I had this experience in 1997 when I was in Nepal doing research. It was Holy Thursday night, and I had this opening experience that wasn't all in a flash. It took about 4 or 5 hours to go through it. And a lot of it had to do with healing wounds of the past, and opening me up. There's one thing after another, just one episode after another coming, flashing by and allowing me to see what was going on and the connections and the misconnections, and just this wonderful healing. And that I did. I tried writing it down as it was happening. It was going too fast, so I taped it. I dictated it while it was happening. So yeah, these things happen to people, and these transformative experiences help us to get past the limitations of our scholarly approaches. So in the book, I try to propose a methodology that opens us up without unmooring us from serious scholarly work and texts and archaeology and history, but letting us also be open to the fact that some remarkable things happen to people in their lives that are life-changing, and about which we can know something, and from which we can gain a great deal. And so that's been kind of the challenge of the book itself. I call it my Mahler symphony, trying to play all these themes in sequence as I work through the book and talk about the meaning of death and how the meaning of human death flashes back onto all of these experiences in life. And in some ways, death is a touch point for that drives us towards spiritual practice and deeper realization. And that's why the rainbow body, is a kind of manifestation of what happens to a truly transformed person at the time of death. And I'm going to say that whether it literally happens to a material body or not, something definitely happens at the time of death to these unusual people. And that is, for all of us, a powerful lesson. I think on really great value.
Center of Light Radio. I'm your host, Keith Anthony Blanchard. Every Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, speaking with guest Father Francis Tiso about his book, Rainbow Body and the Resurrection. Just before the promo, let's go ahead and do some adverts for you, Father. How can our listening audience find out more about you and your work, and how can they find your wonderful book and what you're doing, sir?
All right. Well, some friends of mine have been very kind and put together a website, www.francistiso.com, and there's some links and some interesting material there on my research. And then the book itself, Rainbow Body and Resurrection, came out in 2016 from North Atlantic Books, Berkeley, California. It's on Amazon.com and in various other places on the web. There's another book which I think is very important to back up Rainbow Body and Resurrection, called Liberation in One Lifetime, which talks about the great Tibetan poet and yogi Milarepa, his earliest biographies, his most authentic teachings, which had never before been translated, and which talk a little bit about what the structure of the spiritual path is in Tibetan Buddhism at a crucial moment in its history. And to know that particular book is a great help in approaching the whole rainbow body question. And so those are a couple of things that you can find online. Liberation in One Lifetime and Resurrection, Rainbow Body and Resurrection by Francis V. Tiso.
Just before the promo here, just a bit ago, you were speaking about an experience you had on that cold, brisk, crisp morning. You mentioned how everything was alive, but there was also a lot of conceptual stuff happening. And I would agree with that. I would support that because it was very much that way. I would get this huge, to use the word, bang, this opening, and though I got it, and it was a very much alive when I got it, I was being impregnated with information because it took a while to assimilate, digest, and integrate that information into a usable fashion into my life experience. In fact, I'm absolutely 100% sure that morning that I was blessed to have a divine experience, an absolute experience, that everything it ever wanted, if there's such a thing, over the course of 8 years of writing that book. Now, keep in mind, I would wake up in the morning. I would start writing from noon, sometimes till 9 o'clock at night, and would not get up from that station except to use the restroom or get something to eat or something to drink. But I think everything it was giving me throughout those 8 years, it gave me in that first experience. What are your thoughts about that? Is that how it seems to have worked for you as well, that you get this packet of spiritual light information, and that as you go through your life, you have to, assimilate, digest, process, integrate, and use it in a very real way?
Absolutely. And it comes, it's, the old acorn and oak tree, or many other analogies of that kind. All right. It's all in the little package. You get the little package, and it's meant to knock you out. It's meant to impress you. It's meant to strike deeply, because it's being given to you as a gift to get you going. All right. But then where you're going after that involves the unpacking of the experience. And I can assure you that I spent easily a whole decade flopping about in total confusion, just like any 20 to 30-year-old person in our times. trying to figure out not just the meaning of that experience, but what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And had some horrendous experiences, some really horrendous experiences, not all of which I can blame on other people. I mean, I can blame a lot on myself, on my own obtuseness, on my own arrogance, and so on. And, as you go along, the dark and light sides of our personalities are constantly being bathed by that light, by the light of those experiences that opened us up. But we can't say that we were enlightened. We're not there yet. I had, a lot of difficulty getting into the priesthood, I can tell you. And I really prayed very hard about this and wondered often if I should be a monk rather than a priest or what I should do, And it has never been easy, not from the beginning to the present day, to the very day that we are in today. For many, many beautiful, beautiful experiences, working with some great people, trying to reach out and help folks in difficulty, all that's wonderful. But it has been, with the institution, very, very difficult. And yet one somehow is given the gift also to persevere, to be persistent. And that too gives certain rewards. And I do think that even with our Buddhist friends, talking to them, honestly, in private, their difficulties with the institution, with the challenges of being religious in a non-religious era, and with their own struggles with the unenlightened side of our personalities. I mean, we're all aware of the fact that this is a long struggle, but perseverance in itself seems to count almost as much as the initial experiences of light that came to us as an acorn when we were still, somewhat immature. But it's really interesting to see how John of the Cross is really a great one for showing us how we're stripped of the ego, we're stripped of the attachments, we're stripped of the concepts until pure faith and pure love can emerge. And that's enlightenment, when you can live like that. I remember a great conversation with a Tibetan master back in 1997 in Kathmandu. And he said, well, what do you think the goal of spiritual practice is? And I said, well, from my own tradition, from my own way of seeing things, I think that we get to the point when every moment is a manifestation or a revelation of God's love. And without pausing to take a breath, he came right back with, I think so too. I think so too.
Nice.
He knew what I meant, even though he might have used other words. But the point was there. The underlying truth of that statement is there. And you'll notice that even in that experience in the gorge in Ithaca, New York, there was a voice. There was someone guiding me, taking me by the hand and showing me something. It wasn't just like that it happened spontaneously without the voice. There was a person involved. So as a Christian, we're used to thinking of our relationship with God in personal terms. And certainly in that experience and in other experiences as well, the notion of personhood and therefore Christ as a person never drops out, never drops out. What that person means as it becomes bigger and more demanding is rather difficult to put into words, but it's there. And certainly the revelation of God's love moment to moment is crucial.
I love that. Just very fine. Have you done any research, dabbled in, maybe not the right word, but explored India in the form of its gurus and some of the, quote, God-men? And I'm not talking about the charlatans. Obviously, you know that. I'm not talking about those who you might hear, but some of those who are making a pretty big, loud noise. You have people like Babaji, Osho Rajneesh, Sathya Sai Baba, Meher Baba, and some of these supposedly well-endowed spiritual gurus from India. Have you explored that field in your time?
Yeah, actually, just the other day I was referring to Meher Baba. The others that you mentioned, I tend to avoid because I have an instinctive Gee, that's not where I'm going, kind of reaction. Some of my students here in Italy are much attached to the Osho tradition, the Rajneesh tradition, and we do an exercise that comes from that tradition when we do our annual retreat together. But that's the exercise for the heart chakra. That's a very beautiful dance yoga activity. But other than that, I tend to shy away from these names, although I've been very close over the years to Srivatsa Goswami, who's one of the leading Brahmin priests of Vrindavan in India, the great tradition of Krishna and the Vaishnava tradition. I've been very close for many years to the Milk Baba, who is famous as a yogi and sadhu in the Ramasita tradition in India, reciting the epic of the Ramayana, and who lived for many years, lived on basically tea and milk. Now that he's very old, he takes some vegetarian food, and I visited him in 2013, still as strong as ever at 87, and we have this bond of spiritual communion. In fact, we've had telepathic communication over the years. He's a very, very great master, and I love being in his presence. In 2003, to verify our work on the Tibetan traditions, we interviewed the medical and yoga practitioners in South India, in Tamil Nadu, around Chennai, Madras, Pondicherry, and in the hinterlands there, to explore their practices of kayakalpa, the transformation of the human material body through yoga, herbs, and minerals to prepare the body for its transformation into light. So all of that has enriched this research. And in fact, in the introduction to the book, I talk about the Tamil Siddha tradition as a foil, as a counterpoint to the Tibetan Dzogchen tradition, to try to alert the reader that we're moving beyond boundaries in this book. And so that knowledge of Hinduism and as it's actually lived has been very, very important to me.
Keith Anthony Blanchard, Center of Light Radio, Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, speaking with Father Francis Tiso about his book, Rainbow Body and the Resurrection. Father, some years ago, I don't know why God likes to call me on the telephone. When I learned of an avatar in India, I was teaching a spiritual class, and a friend pointed to the wall. We were talking about Mother Teresa, and there was a bunch of pictures on this wall, a bunch of deities, Mother Teresa, Jesus, Buddha, and so forth and so on. And there was this one avatar, and people who have heard this radio show before heard this story, but I think it's relevant for what we're talking about. One by the name of Sathya Sai Baba, and I've heard all the negative stuff, and I just put all that aside. And I was curious to do a little more exploration when I found out that he supposedly has the ability to manifest at will, being new on the spiritual path. That's the bells and whistles. That's the good stuff, right? And so I began to delve into the books written about him, because he does not write books. He's supposedly way beyond that. Well, I started having dream experiences with Sathya Sai Baba for about a year. Then he came to me one night, made me full-blown conscious and sleep, and says, Keith, come to India. He's standing across the river. Come to India. And of course, Keith goes into human logic. I've never done such a thing. Where would I get the money? How would I put this together? And he's shaking his head going, Keith, you need to learn to put your doubt and disbelief aside. I'll take care of everything. Just be willing. Next morning, I wake up excited, yet doubtful, dismissing it as a dream. But I said, you know what? I'm gonna play the game. I'm going to put this stuff aside. 2 weeks later, Father, no kidding, I get a phone call from a lady I've never met. Hi, Keith, my name is Debbie. Hi, Debbie, what can I do for you? Keith, I'm a flight attendant. Word just got to me through a mutual friend that you want to go to India to see a holy man. And I would not like my buddy passes to expire knowing you want to do this sojourn. Can I give you a first-class round-trip ticket? So Keith Blanchard jets off to India. And this was inspired by a phone call. Well, when I wrote my last book about my journey to India, because I brought a tape recorder there and logged everything, used a lot of adjectives, right? Beautiful blue sky and all this cool stuff. Well, when I was about to finish this second book called For the Love of God, A Spiritual Journey, about my journey to India to see this holy man, Father, when I was there, even though I seen Sai Baba manifest, the most amazing miracle was to see all people from different walks of life, brown skin, white skin, yellow skin, there for the same purpose. And that was the miracle for me. But that being said, as I was doing, no kidding, on the last page, the last edit, putting in a comma or deciding to put a semicolon or whatever it was, when I made that final correction and I hit save on that document and I closed the document and I stood up on the chair and I declared with my hands up to the sky, thank you, God. And this book took me 15 years. Soon as I said this, my phone again rings, and it's a lady by the name of Mona Winfrey. Hi, Keith. Hello, Mona. It's been years since I spoke with Mona. Keith, we have a holy man in town by the name of Swamiji Viswayogi. He was in meditation for like 22 years, and particular deity, Lord Datta, descended into him and became one with this energy. And I interviewed him as one of my first guests on this platform with Inception Radio Network. And I had the blessed opportunity to be in his physical presence, to have him speak to me, to have him do whatever it is he was doing to me. And being in the presence of such masters as you have described in your own, there is something not to be said, but to be felt that is so beyond words. Is that how would you describe your experiences, Father, with some of these masters that you had the opportunity to be in the proximity of? Is just that there's a powerful presence that is almost strange, but somehow familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, of course, if we've had that acorn experience, and then, part of the unpacking of it is these extraordinary encounters with people. I can remember one time when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was in New York, and I was with Brother David. It was a Labor Day, and we were unable to meet with him because there was chaos in the airport. So we went into town and literally went to watch the movie Meetings with Remarkable Men, which is about Gurdjieff. You probably know that. And when we got out of the movie theater, we're trying to figure out where can we go to have dinner. And as we're thinking about this, a huge Cadillac pulls up, and a beautiful woman leaps out and says, I saw you at the airport. What can I do for you? Same as your telephone call, And I said, well, first of all, we're very hungry. And number two, we'd like to go meet the Dalai Lama. So first he takes us to eat the only pizza place on the east side that was open on Labor Day. We get and have a slice of pizza. And then we go to the Waldorf Astoria, and His Holiness had already gone to bed. But we did meet with the secretary and delivered some gifts that friends had offered to His Holiness. And that was very gracious and very beautiful. And by the end of the evening, we were in a taxi driving off to somewhere in Greenwich Village to meet with another Tibetan master who was married and living in the village. And we had this absolutely amazing conversation with him. So it was as if we were swept along. We had opened ourselves a little bit, and the wind blowing us was far stronger than we were. And it was truly an unforgettable experience. And I had that, with a number of people. I mean, sometimes it's not so, dramatic and novelistic. It can be as simple as the tears coming to your eyes spontaneously when some master says something in a very simple, anecdotal way that cuts right to the heart, and it's true. That happened to me with Father Thomas Keating one time at breakfast in a diner on the Upper East Side. These things happen. And there are these amazing people out there who make connections, and make connections at the right moment, the right way. The charism comes when it's needed. That's why, all the traditions talk about being careful about miracles and siddhis and powers. And I think that's true. But it does seem to me, in my experience, that if you let go of wanting those things, when they are needed, they happen. And when they're not needed, they don't happen, and you don't have to be bothered, which is a great help, I can assure you. But so many things that are. This is a great conversation, Keith. I really want to say thank you to you.
Absolutely. I appreciate your presence here. I kind of knew we were going to get off on some of these, quote, far out things. Well, let's stay in that field. When I was a child, being Catholic, my father was a phenomenal human being. I love this man dearly. So does everybody else. That being said, he wanted to make sure that we were brushed up on all of our spiritual opportunities. And this lady came to town. I wish I could remember her name because it's Perfect. But the 3 kids that had the vision of the Virgin Mary in Fatima, maybe not Fatima, one of them, because Mary did make appearances supposedly throughout recent history. Anyway, this lady was telling a story of her and the 2 others about this apparition that came to them repeatedly and often for quite a few years. And I remember very, very clearly some of the things that was said to the audience about her experience and some of the messages. So we fast forward many, many years. One day, a friend of mine was over visiting, and she said, "Keith, do you know anything about David Bergeron?" I said, "No, I do not." I said, "In fact, I don't know the gentleman." She said, "He claims that in his backyard, he is having visions." And this all started about because he wanted to take pictures of his house to get appraised because he wanted to sell his house. And as he was doing so, he hears this voice, "Look up and take pictures." And he thought it was a thought in his head, maybe. And as he does, he begins to see Mary. And as she is descending, he keeps taking pictures. And she says, "Keep snapping that camera, young man. The pictures will get even more clear."
Wow.
And you can, absolutely. And I'm telling you, Father Francis, I'm a bull esser just like anybody else. But it's hard to pull one over on me because I can see. I don't have to be looking with my eyes to see. I can see. And this was in the Polaroid days now, mind you. And you can see her descending. You can see the treetops by her feet. Then you can see the treetops by her shoulder as she's slowly but surely coming towards the ground. But she would never touch the ground, and there was a bed of yellow roses. And I'm thinking, this is South Louisiana. He's Catholic. He went to the same presentation I did, right?
Right.
So I'm using all my faculties. I'm not trying to dismiss it. I'm just finding my center about, quote, the truth. So I called him up, and this guy, keep in mind, was homosexual. No judgment on my part, just a fact of the matter. So I called him up. I said, "David, I heard that you had some pretty wild stuff happening." He goes, "I would love you to come over and see what I have." I said, "Absolutely." So myself and my girlfriend, the one that broke up with me, that left me with the heartache, the dark night of soul that helped me find God, her and I go to his house. He invites us in, and it was very, very cold. And when I say cold, I'm not talking about air conditioner cold now. There is a difference. And I walk into his house. He says, "Are you guys ready?" And he pulls out this frame that can hold 9 to 12 Polaroids. And you can see of her in the clouds in the descent. And I'm sitting here and I begin bawling. And my girlfriend then looks at me and goes, "Keith, what do you think that is?" I said, "You know exactly what that is." And so he says, "She's going to appear to me Good Friday. And I would love nothing more than you both to be here." And of course, my girlfriend opted out. But of course, I was going to get there early. And so by the time this point in all of this, there was a big noise. And there were people from Italy there, all different higher ups there to prove or disprove. Well, David was kicked out of the church because of his homosexuality. Now, to close out this story, there was a particular senator there who was a parishioner of the church. And he was one of them who was behind the ejection of David, and who promised many years before, when on his deathbed, and he prayed to Mary, because that's a big thing in Catholicism, "If you let me live, I will build a shrine to you." He never did it. So in one of the visitations to David, she told David, David went to church and he said, "We told you you don't belong here anymore." And he said, "By the way, she told me that she's very upset with you." Well, words, that you did not follow through in your building of the shrine. And this man fell to his knees. So my experience, when I'm in his backyard, he claps his hands, says, "Okay, everyone, let's come forward. It's about to start." And this guy drops to his knees and begins screaming at the top of his lungs, "I don't know what it is you want me to do. I'm doing everything that I understand you're asking, but yet you're still..." So after the ceremony was over, then I knew that when these people are having these visions, anyone who tries to motion towards the person being visited, you cannot move. You can't even scratch your nose. Any forward motion cannot happen. And so as he's having this visitation, I'm wondering, should I play the test game? And I said, "No, we're just not going to do that right now." I wasn't going to try to test my faith or what was happening. something was happening that day, Father. Something was happening that day, because I saw him take his rosary, put it in his hand. The rosary left his hand and elevated it about 12 feet off the ground, and then brought back to his hand. And then when the whole experience was over, he sort of walked around everybody asking them to touch it. And this thing had ice on it. It was frozen cold. Have you delved into the field of Mary's apparitions?
To some extent. I've never heard of this ice phenomenon. This is really unusual. Usually,
maybe it wasn't ice. That was a word I just selected to describe how cold this rosary was after the experience.
Because usually, like say in the presence of demonic forces, it is said, and this brings up a whole other area, but in some experiences of exorcism, there's this cold, this preternatural cold. But I've never heard of it with regard to Mary's presence. We have actually, right from my balcony here, I can see a shrine church where Mary appeared in, I think, 1888. And so I'm pretty devoted to this shrine, and every morning I look out my window. One of the first things I do is to make a little act of prayer in that direction. And I've taken people there for healing prayer. It's a very special spot. But there was no message. There was just the apparition, but the apparition appeared to a number of people. But this is interesting with the rosary levitating and the cold. I think I've heard of the rosary levitating in some other apparitions, if I'm not mistaken. It's as if Mary takes the rosary from the person and then returns it, as if to bless it, and in some ways also to confirm the authenticity of the vision. So that's really very beautiful. This was in southern Louisiana, you were saying?
As far south as you can go without getting wet. And if I'll even give it to the idea. If it was generated by a demonic force, well, it lost, because everyone left there absolutely life changed for betterment. Father Francis Tiso, sadly, but we are at the top of the hour again. Wow. I want to say thank you for your awesome, phenomenal devotion to what you do. I love your openness. I love your passion and sincerity, your insatiable appetite for wisdom and knowledge, to better not only yourself, but in turn radiate that light into the world. Could you leave our listening audience with a final thought, please?
Yes, you did ask me before, how do folks, what do folks think of what I do? And I must say, start with my mother. And my mother said, "Oh, this is what you've been doing for the past 20 years. and because she's in the New York area and I'm here in Italy. And she said, so you got a lot of your autobiography into this book. And she really appreciated it and has been reading it, she and my dad, line by line. And I find a lot of the parishioners really appreciate this book, that traditional Catholics can relate to it, even though it's taking them to places where their imagination has never taken them before, I can assure you. And so there is something good about that. There's something, maybe the rosary hasn't flown off into the air, but some hearts have been touched. And that leaves me with a good feeling and a conviction that I did something that needed to be done.
Father Francis, would you give out your contact information one more time, please?
Sure. There is the website, www.francistiso, written as one word, .com. The book is Rainbow Body and Resurrection, 2016, from North Atlantic Books in Berkeley, California. And I'm here in Isernia, southern Italy, in the mountains at the heart of the Apennines.
What a wonderful guest. Father Francis Tiso, again, thank you for being a wonderful, powerful, enlightening, fun guest here on Center of Light Radio. Listening audience, Keith Anthony Blanchard here, Center of Light Radio. I am the captain of this mothership as we dive inward to inner space, Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Think about this. When you're laying down at night and you have nothing to do, you might as well do something beneficial. Breathe. You may say, well, Keith, I breathe all the time. No, I mean breathe deliberately, consciously. Put your attention on your breath. When you do, it'll make sense to you, the scripture that says God breathed life into man. And so when you recognize that with every breath, the breath becomes very delicious. It takes on a whole new way of being. And you will find yourself, through the sealing of thought, you will find yourself plugged in and connected to something greater than you have always known as yourself. That is the path. That is where you will find your guidance. That is where you will find the truth. Focus inward. Ease into bliss.